everybody, this is Jenna from Musings from the Middle School. I am here today to share with you a video all about how I teach reading. So this is like the 411 on reading instruction. So I'm going to try to just tape this all the way through, which is really hard to do because I make so many mistakes, or at least I think that they're mistakes, and I usually wind up stopping the video a million times and restarting. But this is a little lengthy. I have a lot to share with you today, and so I want to try to just shoot it all the way through. So be patient with me. Hopefully I won't make too many mistakes, which makes me make funny faces to the camera, and I also have notes that I'm going to be reading off of, so if you see me looking down a lot, that's what I'm doing. Okay, so reading. I have a 50-ish minute reading period every day. I actually have 3 of them. In my district, in my building, reading and writing are taught separately. So reading is its own 50-minute class and writing is its own 50-minute class, which makes me, really lucky because I have a lot of time. I know a lot of you don't have that much time, but next year my district is switching that. We're going to condense our classes. We're going to put reading and writing in the same period. It's going to be an hour long. So look for a new video next year where I talk about how I take all these things that I talked to you about with reading instruction and writing instruction and have to smush it all down into a shorter period of time. So yeah, about 50 minutes every day to teach reading. And in my reading period, I'm teaching all the reading standards. Here in New Jersey, we don't use Common Core anymore. We have our own Common Core, but it's basically the same thing. So pretty much any of those Common Core reading standards get taught in reading class. We also cover some of the writing standards because we do all of our lit analysis in reading class as well. So in my reading period, what I cover in that time is genre, literary elements, literary analysis, nonfiction text features, nonfiction text analysis, poetry, comprehension strategies, and vocab. Everything else is taught during the writing period. So that's what I'm covering in this time. And my district has a mandated scope and sequence. We do have an anthology that we use, and it's full of short stories and poetry and, some narrative, nonfiction, and articles and whatnot. So, all the teaching is done with that book, and I do have a scope and sequence that I have to follow. I teach a unit on plot and conflict. I teach a unit on just like an intro to story elements, so it's sort of like a little bit of setting, a little bit of character, some plot. We have a unit all just on character analysis and point of view. I teach a unit on theme. I teach a unit on mood and tone. I teach a really big unit on nonfiction and arguments and, pieces that inform and explain, pieces that are meant to persuade, pieces that are argumentative, so all of that kind of nonfiction. I have a unit that's all, narrative nonfiction, so biographies, autobiographies, or selections from those. I have a poetry unit, and then I have a unit on, myths, tall tales, folk tales, and whatnot. So that's my district scope and sequence, and, I follow it. And so all the instruction that I do every day comes from there, and it's all taught. I teach it in about 30 minutes a day. If you've ever read anything on my blog or you've seen any other videos, you know that I'm a big fan of the ISN, the Interactive Student Notebook. I just grabbed one of my kids to show you real quick. Anything that I teach them, any instruction that I do, their notes go in here. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this because you've seen this before if you've ever watched this video, or I'll put a link to the video below. But the kids have a table of contents in here. You know that we put the foldable organizers in here. Some days we have lots of time and the kids can make their notes look nice and pretty. And some days we have a lot less time and their notes just look kind of like that. So all the teaching that I do through the short stories, through the poems, through the articles, through all the things in our textbook goes in this notebook. And that's how we spend the first chunk of our reading period. Me teaching them a lesson, notes go in here. Okay, does that make sense? I think so. I think I covered everything. When you use an anthology and you have a scope and sequence you have to follow, you just sort of go with it. I jazz a lot of those lessons up because the ones that they tend to give you are not so fun. You may have seen some of those on my Teachers Pay Teachers store, some of the lessons, the little mini units that I have with my short stories. But I use lots of other Teachers Pay Teachers products as well when I go to teach some of those short stories, because you have to, like I said, jazz those lessons up a little bit because they're sort of dry. But that's really the whole first part of my reading period, is me teaching them, doing some stuff in here, taking some notes. The next part of my period, which usually works out to be about 20, 25 minutes a day, I do Reader's Workshop in here. And that's what I'm going to spend the rest of the time talking to you about, is how I make Reader's Workshop work for me in the classroom. So Reader's Workshop is lots of different things, I think, to lots of different people. I've read countless books on Reader's Workshop. If you've ever, checked out my blog before, I have, my people. Kelly Gallagher and Nancy Atwell and Lucy Calkins and Donalyn Miller and Penny Kittle and Ralph Fletcher and, my people who speak to me. And they all sort of advocate a version of Reader's Workshop. And what I found is I have to take bits and pieces of everybody's ideas and put something together that works for me. Because a lot of what you do in your classroom really has to be reflective of the kind of teacher you are, your personality, how organized you are, what your classroom management looks like. And so, I've taken little bits from everybody's books and I put together a program that works for me. So basically, here's what happens. During Reader's Workshop, my kids read books that they selected themselves, and I ask them to sort of practice what it is I'm teaching them at or during the beginning part of the reading period. It doesn't always work out perfectly. So it could be that one day I'm talking about how characters, affect the conflict in the story. And I might encourage kids to be looking for how that's happening in their book that they're reading during Reader's Workshop time. But sometimes that kid is really, sort of focused on theme at that minute. And that's okay. There's a lot of give in Reader's Workshop. It doesn't always have to be this sort of perfect thing. So, I like for them, when we're doing our unit on characterization, I really try to foster conversations that talk about characters. I'm really trying to get them to think about the characters in the book. I'm trying to think about how their characters are changing, how their characters affect the conflict, how setting is affecting, how their characters behaving. I'll ask them questions about that. I'll give them, some activities to do about those kinds of things using their novel. But sometimes, it doesn't always work out perfectly, and that's okay. One thing that's nice for 7th grade is most of the things that I'm teaching them are not brand new to them. They've been talking about plot and conflict and character and theme and setting for a long time, so it's not brand new to them. So, you can sort of be very flexible with what you have kids focus on during Reader's Workshop time. So during that time, I stream some nice music, and the kids are reading. Some of them read on the floor, some of them sit in their desks, some of them sit on the wobbly stools, some of them sit on the window ledge, but it's a reading time. Everyone's quiet, everyone's reading. It takes a while to get them here. Some of my kids, when they come to me, don't have great reading stamina. They can really only read for, a couple of minutes at a time, and then they're sort of, all over the place. So it does take me some time to build up that kind of reading stamina, but really by November, we're there. The idea is that since they're reading books that they selected themselves, they should be reading them. And if you're pretty open about letting them pick their own books and, letting them choose something that they're interested in, then they really don't have an excuse to not be reading. If they're not reading, then they need to go find something else to read. So I have a really big classroom library. I've talked about my classroom library in videos before, so I'm not gonna, spend a lot of time talking about it, but, pretty much any book they could ever want is there. We also have a great school library that's open for the kids pretty much all day long, so they can go get books from there. But they can bring in books from home, whatever they want to read, they can read. And that's what they're doing during that time. I have everything in my library from Goodnight Moon to Stephen King. I do have a permission slip that goes home at the beginning of the year, and kids cannot take books out of my library without that permission slip coming back. If it doesn't come back, then they can't, read my books. But I talk to parents a lot about that. I talk to them a lot about, my library on back to school night, because I don't censor books for kids. Some parents are cool with their kids watching rated R movies. Some parents are not. I'm not their parent. It's not really my place to make that decision. I don't assign any of the books for Reader's Workshop, so the kid is picking it, and if a parent is uncomfortable with the book that they're reading, then the kid can just take another one. So I've got everything in my library that you can imagine. I don't have a system for checking out my books. I've tried a lot of years to have one, but I'm not organized enough to do that. So it's always like, you know, it goes by the wayside come October. So I just sort of let them go. You see a book you want, take it, do it. I lose maybe like 8 a year. So the kids are reading, they've got their own books, they pick them out, and what I'm doing is I'm walking around and I'm conferencing with them. This is my favorite part of the day. This is the part of the day where I feel most like a teacher. This is the part of the day where I make the most connections with my kids. This is where I really learn about them. So I walk around and I conference with them, and I keep my notes in this very fancy notebook. Wait till you see how fancy my system is. I have a page paper clipped where I covered up a kid's name already. There it is, that's it. It's as fancy as it gets. I carry this notebook around with me when I meet with the kid. I sit down, chat with them for a little bit, and write some things down. And like I said, I learn a lot about kids during this time. And it shows me kids that need help with reading comprehension. It shows me kids that need work with fluency. It shows me kids who, you know, it lets me know what genres they're interested in. I learn a lot about them. And, you know, it really sort of helps form my instruction the next day for what I need to work with kids on. If I'm not conferencing with kids, then I'm running a small group. And if I have kids, you know, say I have 5 or 6 kids who are all really struggling with visualizing or all really struggling with summarizing, then I will call them to the back table and I'll teach them a mini lesson during Reader's Workshop time. So, you know, they can practice whatever skill that I'm teaching them, you know, a little bit later on. When I meet with kids, in the beginning I would use this conference form. This just sort of, you know, helped me out, told me what I should talk to them about, what I should be writing down. I also have some question sheets that I use. I also have task cards that I carry around. Like if I need things to talk about, I have these with me so I can just pull one of these out and ask them a question like, you know, how do you think the story would be different if the setting were different? Give me some examples. Tell me what you think. And that just, you know, sort of helps guide my conversation. There are usually 4 things I have kids working on during this time, or 4 recommendations that I make. What I'm finding with kids, 7th graders or middle schoolers pretty much in general, here's what they need work on. Some kids need to remember to read a little bit faster, because if you read too slow, you're bored before you finish. And these are kids, if you have a lot of kids that read half a book and then they're done with it, half a book, then they're done, half a book, then they're done, it's usually because of this. They don't read fast enough for it to hold their attention. So we talk about that. I have some kids who have a struggle with this sort of like short-term memory. They need to be able to stop and retell every couple of minutes, because if they don't, they, you know, can't remember what they read. I have kids who don't monitor their understanding. So they need to be stopping and they need to be thinking, do I know what I just read? Did I pay attention to this? Or was I, you know, reading the last 4 pages and thinking about the dance Friday night, and so I don't really know what I read? And we also work on making a mind movie. I have a lot of kids that cannot do this. They can't visualize what's happening in the story. They're not putting a mind movie together. And when they can't do that, it really sort of impedes their reading comprehension. So I usually talk to them about this if I need to. Some kids are just great readers and we just sit and have awesome talks about books and I love it. But for me, about 50% of my kids need some of those lessons. So what I do, and you don't have to do this, but you can, but I love to print on Post-its. After I meet with a kid, if they need, you know, one of these lessons, I'll give them one of these Post-its to use just to remind them of, hey, here's what I want to see you working on. And I also sometimes will give them, I have bookmarks too. So they might get a bookmark, but that just reminds them what I want to see them working on. And, you know, next time I meet with them, that's what I want to, you know, that's what I want to see. We talked about this. How's that been going for you? Talk to me a little bit about that. So that's what I'm doing during Reader's Workshop. The kids are reading and I'm walking around and conferencing. We do this for about 20 minutes a day, like I said, and I can usually get to 5 or 6 kids in that time, or run one small group. But that's what I'm doing during that time. Okay, so the other thing I do to sort of see how kids are doing with their reading is we have something called Write About It Fridays. So we do Reader's Workshop where the kids are reading and I'm conferencing or running a small group Monday through Thursday, and then on Fridays we do a Write About It day. And this is where I have kids do an activity that just, it's something, I hate to say this, but it's something that I can grade. Because we're always looking for grades, but it's also something that gives me some evidence and some proof that, yeah, hey, they're reading this book on their own and they're getting some stuff from it. I have a million different things that I use for Write About It Friday, because what I have found is that every time I do something new, the kids are like, oh yeah, this is really cool, and then it's cool for a month and then they're over it. So I have to keep sort of reinventing Write About It Friday. So I use a ton of different things. Sometimes you just need a worksheet. We use these. Sometimes I will just pull out a task card, stick it under the document camera, and everyone answers that question. Sometimes I'll put task cards in a bingo grid and it'll hang on a poster in the room. I have a blog post about this that I'll link down below as well, so you can go back and look at that. But you can see how I set up the bingo board, and the kids will have to do 4 or 5 in a row by the end of the month or something like that. The reader's response journals, I don't have one made right now, but you would make this and I might have them use this for a month, or sometimes we'll use these sheets, or it could be anything. I have lots of other ones too that I bought from other teacher sellers on Teachers Pay Teachers. So don't feel like you have to use my stuff. You could use anybody's. But these are just quick things that work for any novel or any story. And I hand those out and kids do them. And I'm looking for some effort. They know. But it just gives me an idea of, how well kids are understanding what they read. And this is something tangible. I can look at it, I can grade it. Even if I've never read the book myself, that does happen really a lot of times since it's self-selected. But you can get a feel for if the kid is really reading it. Do they refer to the character by name? Are they mentioning really specific conflict details, or are they just saying, yeah, this is a story about a girl who got in a fight with her friend and then she was really sad about it, and she tried to get her friend back, and then in the end they were friends. I need more specifics than that, and they know that, because I want all those little those little details that let me know, yeah, they're reading the book. So these give me that. And so we do that on Friday, and that sort of gives me an idea of assessing where they are. How are they doing? Are they understanding? How's that working out for them? So we do those on Friday. So when it comes to Reader's Workshop, when I grade it, it's kind of tricky to do. Obviously these I can grade, and this is a tangible grade I can put in my grade book. And conferences, I don't necessarily grade them, but I do use them for a lot of things. Like I said, it helps me know if I need to put a kid in a small group, if I need to do a little guided reading sometimes, or some guided comprehension, or they need work with fluency, or they need work, with just, different strategies, different comprehension strategies. I can pull them to a small group and do that. They're great for parent-teacher conferences, so I can sit with a parent and show them exactly what's happening while their kid is reading. So even though I don't necessarily grade those, they do provide me with a lot of good information. Okay, see, this is where I wish it was a workshop, because I could say, hey, do you have any questions? What can I help you with? So I'm trying to think of some questions that have come up in workshops before about this that people ask. So I talked about library, I talked about storage, I mentioned my parent permission slips. Behaviors, we'll talk about that for a minute. So you will get kids that will refuse to play along. And you will spend a lot of time in the beginning sort of coaxing them into reading. I find a few things. I typically, this is the most common reading resistant kid that I find in 7th grade. Kids who tell me, I've never read a whole book myself. That is a kid that you're going to have to work with. Kids who came from a classroom where reading levels were strictly enforced. I'm going to talk more about reading levels in 1 minute, but when kids come from classrooms where reading levels are strictly enforced, where they were maybe told oh, this is your level and this is your box and this is the only books that you can read from. I have kids who get very overwhelmed by my library because I don't level my library. I believe in leveled reading if you are holding the child accountable for what's in the story. So if they're going to have to take a test on that story, if they're going to have to do a project, if they're going to have to do something that holds them accountable, then yes, I want them reading a book on their level. But the purpose for me of Reader's Workshop is really just to get them to enjoy reading. Because if they're not readers, then what are they? I mean, if they're not readers, school is a struggle for them for forever, really. I'm trying to make them become readers. I want them to read for pleasure. I want them to read for enjoyment. I want them to read everything that they see, everything that they can get their hands on. And so when it comes for reading for pleasure, I'm pretty open when it comes to whatever book you want to read. When the Hunger Games first came out, I was still teaching 6th grade. So obviously I had a bunch of kids that were never really going to be able to make it through that book on their own. But everyone wanted to read it because everyone was reading it and it was all the kids were talking about. And so I'm not going to tell them, hey, don't try it. Sure, let's try it. I'll help you out. And what would happen is, 50% of those kids who it was above, 75% of those kids just stopped reading it. They got 10, 15 pages in and they were like, nah, I don't really like it. Nah, I don't really like it is a sign for I didn't really understand what was going on in that story, or I was confused by it, or it was really hard for me to read. Done. Okay, let's try something else. No big deal. But the other 25% of the kids really persevered. They would listen to it on tape, or they would, talk to a friend about it, or they would ask me to sort of help them with it. And they persevered and they got through the book. And you know what? That's a win for them. They read a book several reading levels above their instructional reading level, and that's amazing. That's great. Yay. I mentioned books on tape, so I'll talk about that for 1 second too. I definitely believe in letting kids listen to books. If the goal is to become a reader and it's to work on comprehension, then listening to a book and reading a book is not that big of a difference. There was a really good study that was just done last year. Not like a cheesy one. This was I want to say it was Yale. But that came out that talked about how truly the synapses that fire in your brain while reading and the synapses that fire in your brain while listening to a story when it comes to comprehension are the same. So if it's just about learning to read and becoming a reader and reading for pleasure, go ahead and listen to stories. What I do in here, I don't know if it's the smartest thing, but it's the easiest. I have my old iPhone it was like 2 iPhones ago. The only thing that I have on it is Audible. And I put books on Audible, and then the kids bring their Beats in because they love their Beats. And what's cool about those is that you can connect one into the phone, and then they can connect their headphones to the next person's, and then the next person's, and then the next person's. And I can have like 4 kids sitting and doing like their own little lit circle with a book on tape. I have a group of kids doing that right now with Jason Reynolds' All-American Boys. And it's amazing. It's great. And they naturally talk about the book, and they're having good conversations, and they're reading something that they love and that they're interested in. And most of them may not be able to necessarily read that book totally on their own because it's a few grade levels, it's a few reading levels above where they might be. But hey, they're doing it, they're loving it, and they're becoming readers. So behavior issues, because that's what I originally started talking about here, tends to come when a kid is in the wrong book. So, you just got to keep throwing books at them. Keep throwing books at them. Definitely go and read Penny Kittle's Book Love or Donalyn Miller's the Book Whisperer, and get some great tips on how to get kids interested in books. But I will book talk for forever. I have my list of book talks over here. I'm going to try to, I don't know if I can tilt this over and show you. But hanging back there, if you can see it, are my list of book talks. Those are books that I love, that I talk about, that I sort of sell to the kids. And, you know, that works great. Pretty much any book that I do a book talk on is guaranteed to become, you know, it flies off the shelves. There's usually a pretty long waiting list for it when it's done. But, you know, you just keep plugging away and plugging away and plugging away and plugging away. And hopefully, eventually, they'll find their book. For some kids, this takes a long time. For some, I have kids that, I had a girl the other day who just found her book. She took it to lunch with her, and she was sitting at lunch and reading it. And one of her friends said, "Mrs. Smith, do you see that you brought this book to lunch? This is like the first book that she's actually going to read." You know, and that was, it's April now. So it can take a while for some kids, but you just keep plugging away. The goal is for them to become a reader, and it takes a lot of books to become a reader. So I do a little lesson on abandoning books, because, you know, if a kid's reading a book that they're not interested in or that they're not into, we abandon them. This is hard for a lot of kids because they're not used to this all the time. If they didn't come from a classroom where they were allowed to do that, if all their books were assigned to them, then they're really going to struggle with this. They have a hard time just abandoning a book. But, so we do some lessons on it. I tell them that, you know, I don't finish 50% of what I probably start, but I also I read like a book a day. So in the grand scheme of things, I'm still reading a lot of books. But yeah, we ixnay them. We don't necessarily keep reading a book that we're not interested in. I do have the kids keep reading longs. We keep these in our ISN. So, you know, this is one of my kids' reading longs. Not bad, not bad. I'm pretty bad about making them update this. I try to remember, but it doesn't always work out that way. So, you know, the goal is to just try to keep track of what you read. I do have them set a goal in the beginning of the year, you know, how many books they would like to read. We also have a future reading list. So if kids see a book that they really want to read, they write this down here so they know what to look for next time. What else? I talked about conferencing. I talked about how I keep my anecdotal notes. I talked about how sometimes I have to form a small group and teach a small group, you know, work on some kind of strategy, some skill that they need. I don't necessarily grade this except for our Write About It Fridays. And I won't lie, this isn't every Friday. That would get a little overwhelming pretty fast. But we probably get 3 of these a month. What else? Anything else? I don't think so. But I'm sure I probably left out a ton of things. I'm sure that you probably have some questions. So please leave them below. Put them, you know, you can go to my blog. You can leave them on my Teachers Pay Teachers store. Pretty much everything I showed you is available for sale on my Teachers Pay Teachers store. Again, don't think that you have to buy my stuff, because you really don't. You can put together, you know, your reading block with your own stuff, or, you know, anybody else's stuff. But, you know, I do have all of this available in my reading instruction bundle. You get pretty much everything in that. You get all of the notes that I give, the foldables that I use. You get, you know, all of the different task cards that I use. You get all of the different worksheets that I use for our Write About It Fridays. Yeah, you get the journal too. You get, you know, I showed you these little Post-its with the lessons that I teach. The Post-its and the bookmarks, these are all there. So again, you don't have to buy it, but if you want to, it is all there for sale. You pretty much, you know, can buy that kit and put together a whole year's worth of reading instruction if you want. So again, please ask questions. If something something that you're not sure about, again, this may not have been for you. So I know sometimes people get really upset, especially when I talk about the leveled reading, because I know people are really into the leveled reading, and if that's what works for you, then go for it. I'm not telling you this is like the end all be all way to do it. This is just sort of what I put together, what works for me in my room. This is my, 10th year teaching middle school, I taught the little kids for a little bit, but you know, this has been a work in progress for a good 8 years now. So all this stuff is sort of, you know, I change things a little bit, I remedy them, I try something new, but what you saw here is pretty much what I'm doing on a daily basis. And you know, it's what I have found really works for me, really works for my kids. So I'm hoping it works for you too. So again, if you have any questions, please let me know. If you like this video, thumbs up, that would be awesome. And if there's anything else you'd like to see in video form, please let me know and I'll see what I can do. But you know, thanks so much for watching. Have a great day. Bye-bye.